Awesome. I think we'll get started. Jenny, thanks so much for joining. We're really looking forward to this conversation and it's sort of getting this week kicked off on practically sort of what companies are looking for, how to start breaking into the industry that you're looking to break into. And so kicking it off and hearing from your perspective about, as someone who's gone through like the Google interview process, the Amazon interview process, um, what our students can look into, what people that want to sort of look into those big tech companies, what things they should be focusing on. We're really excited to hear. And also for the format, I think we'll have about, like you said, 50-50 presentation and then open it up right up for the Dory and the Q&A. And so definitely be asking questions throughout on anything that sort of comes to the front of your mind through the Dory. And with that said, Jenny, thanks for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you uh, for the beginning here. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I am going to share my screen first and make sure that works for everyone. Just checking. Can you see my screen?
That looks perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, James, and the Xoogler organization for bringing me in here to discuss what companies like Amazon and Google seek in candidates. I worked at Google from 2008 to 2014. So it's been a while, but hopefully I can still provide some insight. A little bit about me before we start. Currently, I work at Amazon. I am on the Amazon Web Services side on the startup team. What that means is our organization helps startups grow on AWS. And I focus on partnering with university startup programs. So, you're my audience actually for my real work. And we will go to these university programs, work with different of the startup programs such as the Harvard iLab or Stanford StartX, and provide resources that are needed, whether it's technical or business side, the connections to investors and customers. So that's just a little bit about me. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the agenda for today is I'm going to give a quick introduction and then go into what companies seek in candidates and what you should look out for. Then I'll actually walk through the recruitment process, interviews, and give a high-level overview of these processes, but also give you some overly practical and tactical tips when in this process. And then finally, I'll also touch upon onboarding and exit, even though at that point you're no longer a candidate, but in a way, I think you should view yourself as a candidate at all times. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a manager at Google was to that once you start a new job is when you should be thinking about your next job. So that was coming from Google themselves. So I hope you all take that advice as well. So a little background about myself and how I got to where I am today. I graduated from Harvard with a BA in economics, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. And so then after graduating, I went to do what a lot of students who graduate from these universities do, which is be an investment banking analyst at UBS in San Francisco. I was on the tech banking side. Decided I did not enjoy that, and so went to Vivaldi Consulting, which is a strategy consulting firm. After a couple years there, went to Google and was on the finance team. That's kind of how I got my start at Google. And being Google, they are very open and to people changing roles and embracing new challenges. So I actually transferred within Google to the partnerships team, and I'll go into a little bit of that. After Google, I moved on to a very small startup called Mark One. It's a health IoT device company. And there I was mostly focused on partnerships, but I'll also go into how at a startup you do more than one job. And after that first startup, I went on to Grabber, which is a shopping and travel marketplace startup. Also did partnerships there. And after all of that, and that was probably the startup life was over 4 years, I decided to join the AWS startups team, which kind of brings together all of this background and allows me to work with startups directly and startup founders, and also, be able to navigate the big company mechanics and processes of a company like Google, Amazon, and AWS in particular is pretty similar in size and scope. That's a little background about me. This piece is mainly to show that there's no one profile to work at any company. Yeah, if you're, trying to be a cook at a restaurant, you should probably have some cooking skills. There are those requisite skills that you need for a certain role, but really at Google, Amazon, especially a startup, you really want to kind of collect experiences and good experiences and be able to use those experiences to do your role in a generalist sense. So I did investment banking. I was an analyst, and then I went to consulting, and then I went back into finance, but it's not investment banking. At Google, I was on the FP&A team, financial planning and analysis. So we, back in the day when it was still small, I supported the product managers. We took on engineering as a team, and I did some small portions of that, the marketing team, and worked directly with many of the, like Sundar, the very big leaders at Google to help them forecast what their spend would be. I didn't do that side, but other members of the team, we forecast the revenue to give executives a very clear picture of the P&L, how certain teams were performing, if there was a new product launch, what that would look like, and from a financial perspective, and whether it would be a good investment for Google. And after that, did global alliances and partnerships, which used almost none of those hard skills of FP&A. I was on the team that looked at all of our partnerships across the world and across all of the, we call them global alliances, because they were really not only our partners, large partners, but our large competitors, such as Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, Apple, and looked at all the deals we were doing with them and what made sense and what didn't. And if a team was trying to do something new with, let's say, Disney, then what would that look like across the board? How would that affect other product areas of the company? So that was more of a strategy and partnerships role. In addition, we also suggested what partners to go after. If you're launching Google Plus, for example, which was one of the things I worked on, but some of you may not know what Google Plus is anymore. After that, I went into the startup world, where I was the director of partnerships at one, VP of partnerships at the other, but you quickly learn at a startup that you do more than one thing. So I did marketing, operations, supply chain, customer service. I've ordered, been the lunch person. It's really everything at a startup. And in that way, even though you're not focused on one thing, you're learning a lot and getting visibility into what different parts of the business do. And finally, now I'm on the business development team, and that is a very broad and general term, but it involves helping AWS scale its revenue by working with different channel partners, mine being a university startup organization focused one. So that's about my background. Feel free to ask me questions at the end about that and how I got to where I am. But the takeaway here is just that there is no one path to anything. And so that brings me to my next slide. And what I want to tell you before going into all these tactical pieces is to think less. And what I found, especially at Google, was people go in thinking, I want a job at Google. I don't care what it is. I will do anything to work there. It is a very popular company to work at. But I think that the mindset should instead be, these are my skills. This is what I like to do. And what kind of role will fit me and bring me the best experience, instead of focusing on what other people want or other companies want, and then trying to force yourself into that. And once in a role, of course, learn as much as possible and embrace the challenges, and those will really pay off in the end. But to dive into what you may be more curious about in what these two companies in particular seek in candidates, let's go into Amazon first. So Amazon's mission is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. And whether you believe that or think it's just corporate speak, it really should be something you pay attention to as a candidate, because it informs the entire recruiting process, from the way they intake candidates to the way they interview you and the questions they ask and what they're seeking. So for Amazon, being the Earth's most customer-centric company, or aspiring to that, they have, I don't know how, I think there's 14 here, leadership principles that guide everything that is done at the company. So I'm not going to go through each of these. They're online. You can read about them. There's like paragraphs describing what they are. But a couple that seem really important are ownership, diving deep, and earning trust, I would say, are things that we look at a lot. Customer obsession is the top one and is always going to be the case. And that you can imagine what customer obsession means. It's providing whatever the customer needs and providing the best experience and always thinking from their perspective. But Amazon seeks people who take ownership of their work, and not only of their role in their work, but for everything that goes on in the company. So if you see something wrong somewhere else that is not in your area, you still care enough to take ownership for it, to escalate an issue, to maybe volunteer to fix it. And then for dive deep, that's someone who really cares to figure out the root of an issue, and who can use data to figure out what's wrong, what the problem is, not only putting a Band-Aid on something, but really getting into, like I said before, the root of the issue and being able to solve that, because that is a scalable way to do something rather than just Band-Aiding everything. And all that culminates, I think, into earn trust. So that is doing the thing that you say you're going to do and doing it correctly, and making sure that you deliver to your teammates who are relying on you, and that, if you tell a customer that you're going to get back to them with a solution by end of day Friday, and you don't do it until the weekend, well, that destroys trust. So these are the principles, and again, I'm not going to go into all of them, that really inform what Amazon looks for in candidates. And all this with, of course, if you're trying to be a developer, you should know some coding language. There are basic skills that you need for some roles, but mostly they're looking for people who display these leadership principles. And let's go into Google. So what Google seeks. Google is a little more nebulous, in my opinion. There's a term called Googliness, which since you're at Xoogler School, you've probably heard of. And that term is nebulous and can be confusing. And once you're in the company, though, you kind of understand what it means. Someone, I think it was from HR, sought to explain this to the public, and they said it's someone who thrives in ambiguity, values feedback, effectively challenges the status quo, puts the user first, does the right thing, cares about the team. And you'll notice that a lot of these things probably coincide with leadership principles. Every company has a certain set of values that they live by. I would say that Googliness to me is also someone who's a good human being, very kind, helps their teammates, and thinks big, shoots for the moon, and isn't afraid to try out things that may fail. Because after all, Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, which is a very broad, lofty goal. So the Googliness they really embrace is someone who can also think in those lofty terms. So to get into the nitty gritty, let's talk about recruitment. Remember, recruitment at large companies is different than at a startup. A startup, you're talking maybe to the founder, or maybe you are the founder, right? And so the process is much more casual. Recruitment at a large company and at these machines, such as Amazon and Google, are a process. And so they have large recruiting teams that have full-time employees and contractors. And these people are responsible for not only bringing in candidates, and they will bring in some through LinkedIn or different agencies that they use, but they're mostly operational. So when you're talking to a recruiter, they're trying to make sure that you're qualified for the role. I mean, even when looking at your resume, they use certain software technology to scan your resume to look for the skills that you need to be in the role. They're also doing a lot of scheduling, they're doing a lot of emails, for them, it's a process. And then the hiring team is the one that actually leads the process. So when you have an open requisition or an open role, the manager and the team will tap their networks to see who would be a good fit for the role. And they'll also, of course, have the recruiter work on trying to find candidates that no one knows about yet. And then they will lead the process and tell the recruiting team, like the recruiting team feeds them a bunch of resumes and say yes, no to people for a phone screen. And I also want you to keep in mind that managers have headcount goals and are incentivized to fill the seats as quickly as possible. So think of it as there's leverage on both sides. You're interviewing them and they're also interviewing you. It's very difficult to find candidates. So keep in mind that you bring value as well, and that you have a set of skills and you have the drive and the ambition to really help the company, and they want you. So it's a double interview, double-sided interview. And employees also get referral bonuses if their candidates are hired. So they're incentivized to refer people into the company. And this all ties in this all ties into what I want to tell you in don't be afraid to reach out to any of the people on the team or the managers or recruiters, because it is their job and what they're goaled on to bring people into the company. So for interviews, I wanted to talk about, once you get your resume in, sorry, yes, I skipped a slide. Sorry about that. So let's talk about the recruiting process and the details of that. So for the recruitment process, there's the job description, resume, and the network piece. So for the job description, what we want to do is read the job description carefully. Ensure that you have almost all of the required qualifications. There's usually like required qualifications and they list them. It is not a hard rule usually that you have all of those. If you feel that you're a great fit, even if you're missing one thing, like never used Excel, that's something that you can make up for. But you should have most of those required qualifications. Figure out the exact role and team within the company. So the job description can tell you a lot about that. And you want that because it will give you insight into who the people are and also what the team does within the company. And then for the resume piece, after you know what the job description is, you should showcase the skills and experiences that make you qualified for the role. So if there are requirements for an SEO specialist for a marketing role, or there's a designer who needs to know Adobe Illustrator, like those are certain things that if you do have them, of course, don't lie, but if you do have them, make sure that they're in your resume so that a recruiter or someone who's looking at your resume can quickly go through and in their mind check off all of the boxes and be like, oh, this is a great candidate. Then after you've refined all that, go and figure out the people you can talk to based on the role you're interested in, and ask for an informational interview. As I said before, they're incentivized to bring people in. So don't be afraid to reach out on LinkedIn. The worst that can happen is you don't get an answer or you just get a straight no, but that's fine. Most people are very willing to talk to you, to tell you more about the role because they want to refer you into the company. They want to fill what people say butts and seats. So they are incentivized to talk to you. And it also will give you a little bit of a leg up because the recruiter and the recruiting team does pay attention to referrals a little more so than just candidates that come in cold. So sorry for skipping that, but now let's get into the interview piece. So for the informational, which I talked about a little before, these are ones that you can schedule yourself with people at the company, possibly on the team, or maybe they reach out to you and say, let's just have a casual conversation to get to know you. And usually I'll be in the form of to tell you more about the role. And so that is true that they want to tell you more about the role to make sure it's actually something you're interested in before they get the whole team to spend hours and hours going through the phone screens and interviews and then the write-up. So it is quite a process and both sides are incentivized to make sure that it's a good fit. For these informationals, treat it as a formal interview because it does give a first impression to the hiring team or to someone at the company. And I have seen in the past an informational can, usually it doesn't make you not a candidate anymore, but there have been times when people have just not been that prepared for an informational, didn't ask the right questions, didn't really understand the job description and the role, and have not proceeded to the phone screen. So just make sure that you're prepared. It also is a good way to get tips on the interview process. So you can ask them details about like, who will I be talking to, do you think? And what types of questions will be asked? And you can use this information for like what type of people are on the team, you can then go search them up on LinkedIn, every single person, and know their background beforehand. So after informationals, if you do them, there's the phone screen. So with the phone screen, that is the first formal step, of the interview process. And this is when everything starts getting logged into the candidate profile. And so for the phone screen, you're usually screening for skills and experience. There'll be some behavioral culture related questions in there, but whether it's the recruiter or someone on the team is trying to figure out, do you have these skills to do the job? And it's pretty simple. Like, do they think you have the experience? If you're trying to be a coder, maybe you'll get a quick little coding exercise just to make sure that you have those skills. And if you do pass the phone screen, then we get into the on-site interview. And I put it in quotes because for these days, it's usually a virtual interview, but call them on-site. And these are longer interviews with the hiring manager and team members, and sometimes stakeholders. At Amazon, there's someone called a bar raiser who's on a different team. These are back-to-back 45 to 1 hour interviews, usually 4 of them in a row, maybe 6 you'll do, and you will get asked a bunch of questions. Some of them repeat themselves, but they're mostly focused on behavioral questions. For the phone screen, they already figured out that this person could probably do the job. Like if we needed a robot to sit there and do something, this person can complete the task. But the on-site interview will give you, or a loop, or whatever they call it, is the actual interview where they figure out, like, is this person a good fit? And I know the word fit is not used as much these days because it can introduce biases, and that is an issue. But really trying to figure out if you display the values, the principles that will make you successful in the company. And for technical roles, you may have a case study or a presentation or an exercise along with some of these behavioral questions. So what are interviews at Amazon and Google like? For Amazon, and I have more recent experience with Amazon. At Google, I haven't interviewed since 2008, so these may be a little dated, but at Amazon, they ask behavioral questions centered around the leadership principles that I went over before. Each of the behavioral questions, actually each interviewer is assigned certain leadership principles, and they ask questions based on those leadership principles. And they are responsible for reporting back on how you performed or how they think you'll perform based on those principles. Technical roles, as I said before, may do an exercise, a case study, or presentation in front of a large group. So because the questions are centered around leadership principles, the tips I have for succeeding at an interview at Amazon is to review the leadership principles in depth, understand what they are. Google, like search the Amazon interview questions. There are a bunch of examples online. You can kind of figure out what they are. They're typical, like, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager and what you did about that. Or tell me about a time when you did more than you needed to do in order to make something better. So these are very general, open-ended questions. And you should draft a couple of examples for each of these. And you want a couple because the interviewer may phrase the question in a slightly different way, or multiple people may ask you the same question. So you want a couple of different examples for each, and make sure that you practice answering them using the STAR method. And that is situation, explain the situation, the task that needed to be done in order to address the situation, the action you took to address it, and the result that came about. And the result can be bad. You totally failed. But so if you have a result that's negative, then follow up with what you would have done differently. So this is the way that the interviewers are trying to structure your answer as well in order to present it at the end to the committee. And so you want to give it to them in the right format and make sure you explain yourself clearly. On the Google side, there are also behavioral questions centered around general cognitive ability, leadership, role-related knowledge, and that last term, Googliness. And it's no longer called culture fit, but back in the day, you can think of it as culture fit. And so for these behavioral questions, they're not tied to certain principles as much, and these are more general ones that you could, tell me about a time when you failed in public and what did you do to recover? Very broad questions. They're trying to understand how you would act, and also keep in mind that Google interviews want to know how you think as well and your thought process. So you'll be open to explaining the why behind your answers and be open to having a conversation about them. So this actually goes into the tips for Google. Prepare 2 to 3 examples. These are all very similar for a lot of interviews, and focus on explaining your thought process. Be ready to have a conversation about it and be ready to be challenged, and not in the way that they used to do, though, with brain teasers. Brain teasers used to be a big thing, but that has been, from what I know, discarded because it hasn't been shown to really demonstrate your ability to succeed at Google. So you shouldn't have to worry about brain teasers, but you should still be ready to explain your thought process through everything. So after you're done being a candidate, hopefully you've gotten the job and there is an onboarding process to get started in your new role. So take advantage of this learning window, even though you're not a candidate anymore, you already got the job, but in a way you're constantly trying to not only improve yourself and build skills, but you're working with people who will help you with your career, who may be a part of the promotion process, who you may work with down the road. So take advantage of this time to create a great first impression, and also to make sure that you have everything in place and to set yourself up for success. So attend all the trainings and read all the assigned materials. Google is very organized with onboarding, although in the virtual world, it's a little more difficult, but just attend everything, go to all the meetings that are put on your calendar, schedule one-on-ones with team members and stakeholders, even if you're not asked to, so you can learn more about what they do and understand the team dynamics. And most importantly of all, I think during these conversations, ask, how can I help you? Like, what can I do in my role to make your life easier? And people really appreciate that. And during this time, absorb all the information out there, shadow your teammates, and get organized so that bookmark all the important tools that you need. So you're not asking people for the 5th time what that is, because you can ask once or twice, but after that, I think everyone just expects you to be able to find things yourself. And through all of this, is to say, like, be humble. Don't go in there thinking you're going to change how the team works in the first week. Just try to absorb the information, learn from others. If you think of a new idea, just keep in mind that other people have probably thought of it as well, and there's a reason that it's not being done. But at the same time, make sure that you suggest it in a very open-minded manner to the rest of your teammates, because one of the perks that people currently working at a company appreciate about new hires is they bring fresh ideas and new perspectives. So you don't be afraid to bring anything up as well. And then lastly, I'll end with the exit real quick. Maybe you'll work at a company forever, but most likely you'll be leaving at some point when you're ready to pursue different adventures. So leave the same way you entered. What I said before about you making a good first impression, you also want to make a good, not last impression, but impression when you leave. So don't just check out and say bye and that's it. Keep in mind that you will most likely see these people in the future and you will help them and they will help you. And so these are hopefully friendships that last a lifetime. So make sure you inform your manager and the team in person that you are leaving, if possible, if it's possible to be in person. Give them at least 2 weeks notice. Usually I try to do more. So it just gives people time to open up that requisition, talk to recruiting. Maybe you help find your replacement, whatever it is. Close out all of your outstanding work. Don't just leave things open-ended because people are relying on you, and ensure a smooth transition of your responsibilities by documenting everything, sharing files, forwarding emails. I think of it as like someone you work closely with suddenly leaving and they have all of the files or the old presentations that you used to do with all of the data. Like you wouldn't want them to just leave you hanging and not have access to any of those things. And then lastly, maintain the network that you build, especially at a place like Google. There's a very strong alumni network and people are very close. The environment really fosters a sense of community. So that's one of the great perks of being at a place like Google, and just make sure that you take advantage of that network. And so that is it from me. With that, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have. I kind of glossed over everything pretty quickly, so feel free to ask me more specific questions, whether or not they're related to recruiting and hiring and being a candidate at these companies.
Yeah, Jenny, thanks so much. Really enjoyed your presentation, and thank you for walking us all the way from, the informational prepping for that all the way to the exit. So really like the framework that you sort of set this in, and seeing the different tips and preparation points for both Amazon and Google sort of next to each other was helpful, and definitely sparked a lot of questions because we have 10 already. So I would like to just start rolling through those. And if you are all right with that, I'll just get started here.
Sure. Do you want me to keep my screen up, or
No,
do
you
you want
can
to
close
share
it
the
out.
story? Okay.
Yeah, and then if you're fine, I can just ask them. Oh, my video's off. There I am. If you are all right, I can just sort of voice them over to you.
Sure.
And I think you also have the link, but I can resend that. The first question we
Yes.
had is, could you give a quick example of how you've used the STAR framework in past interviews?
Sure. Putting me on the spot here.
Could be
So
hypothetical.
yes, I can. So the STAR method, actually, let me try and give you a real example that was used by myself. Let's see if I can pull it up. If not, I will give you one on the fly. Let me see if I have anything. I actually don't think I have my notes anymore, so it's okay. I'll just give you an example on the fly. So for the STAR method, situation, task, action, result. Let's say the question was, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your manager and what you did in that situation. So I could say that, in my mind, I'm thinking, what is the situation? This is the first piece. Back when I was working at Google, let's say, and we were deciding whether to, I was working on a team that was deciding whether to launch free Wi-Fi in airports across the US. And I had done financial analysis that showed that it would be a bad idea, bad investment, of course, provide more details, but to start the launch at SFO because it is too large of an airport, it was cost too much for the initial launch, and we should instead focus on a mid-size airport that has a smaller footprint, but lots of traffic, like, I don't know, Austin or something like that. And my leader of the project disagreed because they want some big marketing launch. So at that time, then that's the situation. And then the task for me to do in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so what do I need to do to change this person's mind? So then you can answer, I needed to show that it actually would deliver bigger results in the end and provide more value per dollar spent if we focus on these smaller airports. But there wasn't that data to compare it to a large airport. So I needed to do that. Then the action I took was to actually go to find all these research reports, or I, talked to the Wi-Fi expert at Google, and I gathered all this data and I put together this model and presented the findings to this manager and showed them how we could launch in these smaller airports, but then also that would help us get buy-in from the large airports, and we can reuse a lot of the economies of scale that we have built up in working in Austin to actually lower the cost of SFO. And by the way, I'm making this up. And so that is the action I took. And then the last piece is the result. Because of all this wonderful work that I did, of course, don't say it like that. You would say, like, because of the analysis that I did and the different stakeholders that I pulled in to also support this analysis, I gave a presentation to this manager, and they decided that the data backed the conclusions made initially, and that we would do a pilot at Austin and then, plan for a rollout at SFO. So that is an example of the method. You would be a lot more concise in practice for something like this, but that it clearly explains what the situation was, what you had to do, the action you took, and then most importantly, the result that came about. And with the results, you should have data to support this. And you can see that I didn't go into much detail because I didn't actually do something like this, although I did work on an airport project. So you should bring in the data so that you can indicate that you're actually close to this problem. It is obvious sometimes when candidates will make up things on the fly, and then they start contradicting themselves. They don't have any details about what they did. So you want to avoid that situation, which is why you should practice and jot down some of these stories that you're going to tell.
Awesome. Thank
Hope
you,
that was
Jenny. Thanks
helpful.
for thank you for walking through that. Definitely provided clarity on sort of the general framework. A question from Lauren, which is, how do you recommend preparing for an informational interview? Is this always a required step in the recruitment process to get to the phone screen step?
The second piece of that question, no, this is not always a required step in the recruitment process. It is helpful to do them because you get a sense of the team and the role and make sure that it is the right fit for you. And sometimes teams will do them outside of because it's outside of the official phone screen interview process, and can get to know you a little bit more and help prep you for the role. And how would I recommend preparing for them is to search on LinkedIn the person you're talking to, what their background is, what team they're on, read about the role in the company, so that you know what questions you have and what questions to ask. And yeah, that would pretty much be it. Just make sure you know who you're talking to and be prepared with questions. And be prepared, last thing, to walk through your resume, because that may be something that is just a general kind of icebreaker question. Like, so tell me why you're interested in the role, or tell me what you've done in the past. So be prepared to answer those.
Awesome. Thank you. And Alina is wondering, how do you demonstrate the Googliness that you were talking about in an interview?
So that is through uh, the behavioral questions that they'll ask. So someone who can, going back to some of the definitions, or not, loose definitions of what it means to be googly. So in your behavioral questions, you can talk about how you did something that may not have been the perfect thing to do for the bottom line or for your own personal interests, but was the right thing to do for the user. Like you figured out that making an ad, and you probably wouldn't have this experience, but something like you figured out making the ad bright pink would get more clicks, but you know that is very straining on the eyes. It's not good for the user. It's detracts from the information that they're actually trying to find. So then, something like that will show that you put the user first. You're thinking about the product. You're thinking about the user. You're not just thinking about how do I make short-term gains. And I think a big piece of googliness is someone who's a great teammate. So also talking about how you helped someone out when you didn't need to, how you chipped in when it was detrimental to you, things like that, that kind of show you are a team player, you're a good person, and you're a great person to work with and get to know, are good examples when answering the behavioral questions. Like the opposite of googliness would maybe talk about how you destroyed all the competition from your teammates and ended up being the only person left on this project and got all of the credit for it. That would not be googly. So don't talk about those examples, but talk about ways in which you were a better person to be around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just going to piggyback off that question. Someone is also asking again, how do you show your googliness, which you covered, but then more specifically, Iris is wondering, she's applying for the APM position, and she's wondering if you have any advice for someone doing a product interview.
So unfortunately, I have not been in the APM role nor interviewed anyone for the APM role. So I'm afraid I actually wouldn't feel comfortable giving you advice on that, because it may not be good advice. So for the APN role, though, knowing people who've done that role, they are great problem solvers. And so demonstrating that and demonstrating ability to work with others, I think are a couple of important things.
Definitely. We also have Matt coming in this afternoon, speaking all about the APM role, which will hopefully provide a little bit more info on that, Iris. And Jenny, a question here about your experiences at a startup, and that's how did you transition to working at a startup? What was the networking/recruiting process like, and how did you find out about that specific startup?
For the first startup, I actually had a friend who worked there already, and he was connected via a friend as well. So it was a college friend, and he knew that I was looking for a new role at a startup. So he reached out, and for the recruitment process, it was a series of casual conversations with everyone on the team, which I think was like 5 people at the time. So it's definitely a lot less lift and preparation. When it's a small team, everyone just wants to make sure that you can work together very well. You already know that people, and even a large company, at a certain point, you know that people have the skills to do the job that needs to be done, but it's about finding someone who complements you on a small team, personality wise, but also just the way you work. Some people have a different decision making process, have a different way of thinking about things. So that is something that a startup will look for as well. And I forgot if there was a second part of that question. So James, tell me if I missed something.
No, I think it was just about how you transitioned into working at a startup, I guess, and then, yeah, how you found out about it. So, yeah, no, thank you. Let me see here. Question from, I guess that this question sort of goes off the startup question again, which was, um, can you sort of give your thoughts on pros and cons of working at a bigger company versus a very small startup? Like, did you prefer one over the other? Do you, uh, what are your thoughts on that as someone who's gone between both?
Mm-hmm. I think the question depends on your stage in life and what you're looking for. So let me first go into the differences. At a big company, you have the resources to do pretty much whatever you want to do, although you'll have to jump through a lot of hoops because you have to get approval from legal and finance, and you have to fill out certain paperwork. It's still online, but you have to fill out certain forms, and you have to make sure you have budget. So those are all things that you will learn to do and have to do at a big company. You can't just go off and launch a product by yourself. You have to go through a process in order to develop that, and it has to pull in a lot of stakeholders. At a small company, you are expected to do what you need and what you want in order to make things happen for the company. So, most of the time, especially at a very, very early stage startup, you don't need to say, oh, can I go try out this guerrilla marketing tactic? Like, can I stand on the corner of a street and hand out flyers? You just go do it. And then if it fails, it fails. If it doesn't, then it's great. New learning for everyone. And you'll be expected to do a lot of those little things. You'll like stepping in if you get a flood of customer inquiries, you'll be sitting there maybe in the middle of the night answering customer service questions. So just be prepared to do everything. The pro of that is that you learn to do a lot of different roles, and it gives you a great experience and forces you to hustle more and think creatively. The pro of a large company, as I said before, is that you get a lot of resources to do what you want to do, a lot of training, a lot of learnings about best practices. The cons of working at a large company, as I said before, is you just the inability to make quick decisions, fast moves, come up with new ideas and execute them the next day. The con of a startup is you can't just call someone up, say, I'm from Google or Amazon, and they respond to you right away because they want to talk to you and they want that business or they want to work together. At a startup, you'll say, oh, I'm from XYZ startup, and you're most likely going to get ignored. So there is a little more frustration from that angle and just the amount of impact that you can have. And all that, say, if I were just graduating from college, I would say that you can build your skills the most and get the experience that will pay off in the end the most if you work at a little later stage startup that is still growing quickly, so that you can take on a lot of responsibility, have a lot of room to move up and grow, and hopefully be at a place that will succeed, be a wild success. But even if it isn't, you will still learn so many things and be able to work on operations, work in, if they're making a product, manufacturing maybe, or HR. You can really do whatever it is you desire, and that will serve you well when, if you want to work at a large company. And most likely those companies will always be around, so you can always go and work with them if that's what you want to do a few years or much later down the line.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful advice. We had a couple more questions right along those lines of do you think it's best to start at a big company, startup, what size? So thank you for sort of already covering that. And I do have a question here, which is it's on a specific Amazon thing here, and it's about drop shipping. Do you know more about drop shipping? And Peter's asking, he sees ads on YouTube, but it's hard to believe that people are running ads for this type of mentoring. So I personally don't know about drop shipping, but is this something you can speak to?
No, sorry, I cannot speak to that. I work on the Amazon Web Services side, which is our cloud infrastructure arm. I don't know anything about the retail side, so unfortunately I can't answer that question, but I will say, there are a lot of businesses that make money off of teaching people how to
Yeah, am I still on? Oh. Jenny, I think you're cutting out for a little bit. There you are.
Oh,
You're
sorry.
back. No,
Okay.
no worries.
Sorry, did you miss?
I did miss the end of
Sorry,
it.
I can't answer that question. I was just saying that to be wary of people offering, like a get rich quick or, how to hack Amazon shipping tutorials, because there are a lot of those out there.
Okay, awesome. Let me see if you are all right. Do you have time for one more question here?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. This question is again on sort of the behavioral questions for Google and Amazon. Should we start by searching common behavioral questions that are asked? Do you have specific websites or resources that we could use to sort of prepare?
Mm-hmm. There actually aren't specific websites. I mean, Google and Amazon are not publishing these questions. There is, to be honest with you, there's an internal question bank for people who want to get a little, interviewers who want to get a little help. But these are seriously very general behavioral questions. So you can just Google Amazon interview questions. When I interviewed, that's what I did. And there are a few examples. Just pull out some of those. If you have a friend who works at Amazon or Google, I cannot do this for you, but if you do, maybe they would be willing to share a couple of questions that they've asked candidates. So there are ways to get those interview questions, but I promise you they are very basic and they are meant to be open-ended so that you can answer them in a way that showcases your skills, abilities, and values, I guess.
Awesome. Jenny, thank you so much for preparing this presentation, sort of walking us through from the interview process to the exit interview process and bringing in your knowledge from your experiences at Amazon now and at Google in the earlier 2008 and that sort of era. So thank you. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you also for answering all these questions, no matter how specific. I really appreciate it. And I know our students did as well. But yeah, thank you so much and good luck as you continue on at Amazon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, everyone. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Jenny Wong and I have Amazon Web Services on my profile. So you should be able to find me. And good luck with the rest of Xoogler School. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we will see everyone on YouTube Live or wherever you're tuning in from at 1 p.m. on 1 p.m. Pacific on for Matt Suskin's conversation on the APM role at Google. So thanks so much, Jenny, for joining, and we'll see you all later.
Okay,
Goodbye.
bye.